I'm going to talk to you about stuff that's totally non-controversial today, which you'll appreciate. So I want to tell you about a center that we have at Stanford doing, which is funded by the Lemann Foundation in Brazil. We're one of several universities that gets money for them. Most of the money goes for student scholarships. So we have a lot of Brazilian students now at Stanford. We just admitted 4 master's students and 3 doctoral students, which bring our total to 10 doctoral students since we started. But we also have a research agenda, and we have a sort of a policy agenda that we do in Brazil. Part of our agenda is to do all these things. So the overall mission is to improve Brazilian education, and we do this in many different ways. The title of the center is for Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Brazil. And a lot of the sort of philosophy of the foundation down in Brazil, because of the nature of the primary, the only funder of that foundation, Jorge Paulo Lemann. He's a big investor, private equity guy in Brazil, and he owns 1/3 of all the beer in the world. And I mean, it's this immense food empire that they have, including Heinz and what else do they have? Kraft, Burger King, Corona, InBev for Europeans. They just own food. They've got a bid in for Unilever now, so they want to just control the junk food of the world. Anyway, and the beer. So, but he's very, very generous with funding education. Now he has a view about education, but he's very eclectic. So we do anything we want in terms of the research we do, and I want to describe some of that before I get to what sort of this morning's session, because we also have over the years tried to figure out what is the binding problem for education in Brazil. And strangely enough, it's very similar to the binding problem in Chile, in South Africa, in Mexico, and in the United States. And that is teachers and what they know and how they teach. So I'll get to that. But we've published a lot of stuff recently, and a lot of stuff in the hopper. And so I just want to summarize very quickly. I appreciate the short talks throughout this meeting. I'll try to keep it short as well. We've shown with other people that the gains in Brazil on the Pisa and on their national test seem to be real. The Pisa tests are way overestimated. The reported Pisa test results in Brazil are way overestimated for various reasons. One of them is that the test date changed over time, so the kids were progressively later in the year, in the school year, which is a whole it's the calendar year in the Southern Hemisphere. So by moving the date from April to November, you effectively put kids later in the year. And their test scores went up. Some other researcher in Brazil showed that. And we showed that it's also partly because the kids get progressively higher in higher grades each time the test is given, since there's not 100% in sort of 9th and 10th grade where most of the people are. So they've moved up, and that's part of the gain. But in any case, there are mathematics gains, not reading gains, over time. And the same on the national test. And the gains are larger among lower income kids, lower SES kids, than higher SES kids, which are practically flat, by the way, and even declining on the national test. In another paper, we did it by states. Brazil is a federal country like Mexico and Argentina and the US. and Germany. And in those places, Australia, in those places, there can be state differences. And those state differences can be quite useful to understand because there's a lot less distance between states in a given country in terms of culture, in terms of educational culture, in terms of teacher labor markets, et cetera, than between one country and another. And so we found it's very useful to look at the gains across states. And we found that one of the reasons that these gains may differ is the coherence of the state governments. There are two kinds of schools, two systems of schools in every state in Brazil. Over time, the primary schools have become almost entirely in municipalities and run by municipal systems. And the middle schools are more, they vary from state to state where the percentages are. And the high schools are almost entirely state run. So if there's not, you can imagine if you have two different systems going on, if the kids aren't being very well educated in the primary schools because of it, they have a badly run municipality, then they end up in state high schools eventually, and they're way behind. So the lack of coherence between the state government and municipal governments can turn into a disaster in terms of what happens in a state. So those states that do take a coherent approach by the state government to the municipalities and do reforms which in fact tie the municipalities in, the general reforms, and there are poor states and rich states that do that. It's not necessarily just rich states. They've been seemingly much more successful in making gains. Now, we don't have a causal analysis, but it seems to be the case. We have other, our students have done a variety of very, very interesting studies, from teacher labor markets to peer effects to dropouts and the impact of a literacy program, a causal analysis of impact literacy program, a causal analysis of converting the last year of preschool into the first grade of elementary school by lowering the entry age. It didn't happen all at once, so that allowed us to do a triple diff on that, and with robustness effects. And we found about a third of a standard deviation increase in test scores by the 5th grade. Now we're going to test whether it goes all the way to the 9th grade. We'll be able to do that in the next national test. A longer day in high school we've evaluated in one state, which has done a lot of investment in long full-day high schools, and there's a large positive effect of that too, about a quarter of a standard deviation. Now the difference is that that first one in primary school is very low-cost reform because they just converted the last year of preschool without even changing the teachers and just all handed them a first grade curriculum and said, now teach this. And we got this big effect. But the full day high school is really an expensive innovation because you got to double the size of the schools, the number of classrooms. And we're doing other studies, and you can just read that. All of this is ongoing research by students and faculty. We also engaged in university level research, and we're in the midst of doing a value-added paper on Brazilian universities. We have individual data, very much like in the Colombian case, with the test score at entrance test score versus the final year test score. Brazilian universities test everybody at the end of every program with a specific skills test and a general skills test. And we're going to be able to do a pretty good study on that. And one of our students is trying to measure the effect of between the labor market and what happens in the university, for example, whether they go to night school or not. So we're doing a bunch of studies on the university system, which is 72% private in Brazil. 72% private and only 28% public. They have the top of the system are the federal universities and some private research universities. and the rest is private, ranging for some sort of middle-tier private universities to some massive, very large for-profit universities, which are diploma mills. So at the end of the day, we came to the conclusion against the popular sort of mythology in Brazil that, and by the way, the US, that there are silver bullets out there that are going to save the educational system. And we concluded that there are no silver bullets. The very foundation that sponsors us has poured, I don't know quite how much money, but it's certainly in the millions, into the Khan Academy, translating Khan Academy stuff into Portuguese and disseminating it throughout the schools. And it doesn't seem to have much effect. And the same thing, I talked to people in Mexico. The Khan Academy is also there by Slim Foundation, thanks to Slim Foundation, and doesn't seem to be having much of an impact either. So one type of intervention that seems to work involves more time on academic work, either an extra year of primary school or a longer school day or more time on task. Some of these are very costly and others are less costly. And another type involves targeted training, such as the one done in Ceará and now is national, with a particular literacy, scripted curriculum, teacher training, incentives for the schools based on test score gains, and greater parent involvement in school. All of this has some effects. They're not huge, but some effects. So there are interventions that seem to work under certain circumstances. It's very hard to implement these in a large scale because, again, they depend on very well administered programs. The one in Ceará happened to be extremely well administered. It's unclear in other states whether it's going to have the same kind of effect. Most municipalities are smaller and not coordinated actors, so state leadership, unlike the big urban municipalities, which, by the way, in most cases do not have good results. For example, in Pernambuco, the major cities, Recife, Pernambuco is trying all kinds of reforms and is having a lot of positive